Okay, I don't want to spend too long in the intro, so I'll get straight to the point. There were a lot of IDs released last year that didn't make it into their respective videos, and you all deserve to know my thoughts on them. Now, the plan was to do it in both status and chronological order, but given the death of single status IDs, it'll be more vibes based than anything else there. We can all tell when an ID is just given a flavour status for MD, right? As such, we start with She-Faust, because I ranted enough about Encore Ryoshu in the Tremor vid, and wow is this ID irrelevant. People were harsh on her when she released, but now it feels like no one cares, and for good reason. As a baseline, her kit is fine. The obsession with Force doesn't entirely fuck up the numbers. She's got good damage conditionals, the good type of hybrid payoffs, and then I rapidly run out of nice things to say. Her status numbers are dire, with awful poise sustain and miserable bleed count, to the point where even Thorakalgia can't keep her neutral. Her passive lets her gain some count whenever she gains potency, but this is 3 times per encounter? This does reset whenever she goes down to 3 arrows, but this barely helps given how bad the core arrow gimmick is, especially when you realise she'd have to have all 4 arrows to even trigger it. This whole side of the kit is, let's call this barely functional would be generous. There's nothing here to actually even give the illusion of it working. The intent, I presume, was to spend 4 turns stalling, then firing off a huge damage skill, which to a certain extent is what happens. The problems aren't even under the hood though, and I imagine even the second monitor viewers have picked up on half. In no particular order, however. 4 turns of not attacking is a lot, especially considering that the defense skill used to proc it is a regular guard. Enemy infliction still really hurts. She still loses poise count each turn while doing this, and has no way in her kit to mitigate this, meaning you need her to pop an ego first to give her sustain. To make this even more messed up, the strongest version of the attack only has an on-crit damage conditional, and every version exclusively gains power from poise, not bleed. The power of this big attack is heavily predicated on what skill you roll on the last turn, and there is a mechanism to ensure you get to use an S3 for the max weight version. Except if you roll an S3 as an upcoming skill, you need to wait to be handed that one, meaning you either fire off a weaker version, or wait a 5th goddamn turn. It doesn't even do good damage. Best case, this skill does just short of 300 damage. Using 2 S2s and 2 S1s, assuming they've got their conditionals, nothing from her passives, ego or outside supports, you get 60 less damage, ignoring bonuses from clashing, damage from inflicted bleed, and perhaps most importantly, the fact that you're actually gaining SP. This ID sucks, and I'm honestly glad, if only because it maintains my anti-She agenda. Moving on though, Bleed gets an actually relevant ID in Prince Mer. He might not be anything special, relatively speaking, but that still makes him the 3rd best Blood Fiend, and a pretty easy 7th slot for the team. His rolls are slightly above average, most notably his S2 and S3-1, with both hitting decently above the curve. The S3-1 is actually just stronger than the S3-2 if you're not using the attack weight, given it has actual coin power, so against 1-part enemies, use the S3 earlier rather than later. As for the related conditions, Hard Blood Armour is just a really nice piece of sustain for Bleed. With how in demand Illustrez is for their passives, getting 20 HP a turn is pretty nice, more so when it'll just freely stack up. Focus Performance is a decent payoff for running the other Blood Fiends, with it providing some pretty impactful scaling buffs. While all 5 IDs appreciate it, I'm still against running Outis or Greg, given their count-agnostic kits, but for those who enjoy the full La Mancha squad, it is even better there. To help cement that further, La Mancha Parade is a small amount of effective fragility that unfortunately disappears too quickly to really be noticeable. While it really does bolster the Fiends, you're never running just them, and any hit against the target will lead to stack, but if you manage to actually apply a decent bit, it can make some nuke turns slightly better. Treat it as a little bonus, not an expected part of the kit, and you'll likely find it helpful. This next ID is the competition for that 7th slot, and it's not entirely one-sided. Nightfall Greg is a pretty good ID when all his stars align, and the interesting part is that his best case is generally Mer's worst case. Against an enemy with just 1 part and no adds, Greg can be a damage machine, trading consistent count application for 3 high damage skills, a counter to enemy defense skills, and some decent, if minor, speed control. While Tremor Hemorrhage is still pretty bad, he makes it an actual help, given Deep Wound. Although this isn't overly impressive till he hits Fatal, it turns his bursts into half a bleed trigger for free. His main weakness is having his ramp up dramatically slowed against enemies with adds, unstaggers and forced turn ends, given he really wants to get a bunch of Mercedes, and really just can't if he's not able to actually trigger his passive. As such, he's a pretty simple sub in or out for Prince Mer, depending on the enemy, and how valuable attack weight actually is for that fight. Kira-ish is also a bleed ID, but there's just 0 points saying anything about her in this video. Maybe we want to do a full middle video, sure, but for now, why would you ever use this over KK-ish in any capacity? She's got some interesting design, with her thermal blades making her a cool hybrid, but there's literally 0 payoff anywhere else, and it's not like Envy is a particularly common sin on either team. And then there's fuck-ass Hornet Mur, who decided that actually Sport isn't bleed for some reason. Oh, there's bleed in the kit, and in fairness, a reasonable amount, but Spore is just burn counts, and the payoff is a burn trigger. This has actually legitimately pissed me off, though his use in burn is a bit more interesting. Now, with bleed out of the way, next is charge, and with it, W Corp Heath. I'm a fan of this ID, but I really can't say it salvages charge. It's pretty obvious by now that charge needs some actual synergy, given that we're long past the days of just running the 5 strongest IDs on a team, yet that seems to be all charge gets. As for Heath in specific, nothing here is bad. The force to mobilise on the guard might seem to be an issue, but the defensive buffs are incredibly potent, and having consistent access to your skill 3 is always good. That S3 is also worth a mention, following the standard of being a pretty low clashing skill till 10 charge, and then turning to a heavily above curve nuke skill, but none of this is anything really special. Charge is still a team without a purpose, with literally all the other 6 statuses having an actual reason for running them as a group. What does charge have? A slightly faster setup from Don's telepole? As it stands, most charge IDs simply lack any real cohesion, and while Heath is absolutely worth running, the team as a whole isn't. This doesn't get any better with Reindeer Rodion, perhaps the most pointless ID since Daichi E. I cannot understand the thought process of following up the second best ID in the game, who is already a charge sinking ID, with another charge sinking, except making her just worse on both. She's competing with Reindeer-ish in terms of actual quality, which isn't great for an ID released years after her. There's nothing here to really analyse, and it's not like she's a budget version of Knight of Despair. She's got no value in being run on either team. At least her support passive is fine as a way to buff Queen of Hatred Dawn. Thankfully, Charge does at least get a reason to be run as a team with one of our newest IDs, AEDD Greg. After my prior whining about the lack of cohesion, clearly PM read this script and designed the first actual Charge ID that supports the status. His kit has the usual Charge stuff, fine baseline, higher peaks, and a longer road to get to the best part, but his ramp up is reasonable. His charge chunk gain is pretty fast, as is his actual speed, which is really important given the same turn infliction of photoelectricity and charged sting. Those of you who watched the original charge vid might think I'm going to disregard the help photoelectricity provides, but it's a fine aid for the team. My issue with it before was that MC Heath simply didn't have good enough numbers to justify it, and only applied a relevant amount after turning on his passive and going for a few turns. Greg completely lacks these issues, while also having more ways to help the team. Charge Sting, as an example, is a decent fragile stand-in that, while it does get consumed pretty fast, is applied in pretty good amounts if you hold the S3 for a few turns, and lets your nuke skills hit even harder. High Voltage Exoskeleton, his last relevant unique buff, is pretty minor, just being a slight upgrade to Charge Barrier, and doesn't really need me to explain it. His passives are all good, with him starting off having the modern standard of always on charge potency gain, more speed gain, which brings him to a 6-8 speed range, and self-charge when he die. This is pretty irrelevant and is effectively just 2 to 3 turns of him flailing around before he dies. He doesn't actually drop immediately if self-charge runs out, but again, not very relevant. His second passive starts poorly, given that Charge only has 3 Ego Gear IDs, but if you do run Despair Rodion, it's a bit of offense level for them. This will likely be more notable after a couple more Warps or NCOP IDs, but until then, the second line has some actual value. AEDD was never an actually relevant Ego for Charge, considering the lack of a useful Gregor to put it on, the awful corrosion, and that it saw all its value in Rupture for Sparks, but having an ID for it dramatically helps. Not only does Greg want to spend charge count to actually gain potency, but he doesn't even lose count early, instead spending some of his wealth of HP and shield to help your least charged Sinner. This is all good already, but the next passive is the entire reason I like this ID. 2 Gloom and 2 Envy. Just getting that small requirement immediately turns Greg from a decent Ego user that rolls well into the best support piece for Charge since Telepole, if not even better. First, it lets Greg just skip gaining charge for a turn, meaning the moment you get this incredibly cheap passive online, you can just go straight to spending, but it also spends by itself, providing charge to up to 3 earlier deployed allies, or provides him more charge, depending on your Sinner order. As is, this really incentivises you to put the IDs that struggle for count early before him, and even allows things like running a small charge package and other statuses, all without compromising any of its efficacy. Does this pile of upsides make charge worth running? The answer is hopefully a pretty obvious no. No, of course not. Charge sucks, there's 4 good IDs, the team is slow and unimpressive, and the best charge ID is a sinking one. But what this is a good step. Charge has an uphill battle to being good. Given that to make other statuses good, they just need to make their stack bigger, or for Poise, put crit damage conditionals that just get more stupid with every new ID. Charge needs to actually innovate for its improvements, as nothing inherent to the status actually gives them a boost. But having designs like this do give me some hope. Other statuses have been in similar positions before, and they made it out decently, so maybe we get some real sauce for my electric boys at some point. As for Poise, there would be quite a few to go over, but I'll be putting all the index IDs in sinking, so the only relevant ID is Ren Sinclair. He's a fairly simple Poise ID, but that's not an insult. He's just got good skills, actual sustain for his stack, and pretty high damage, all on an ID with no real need for external support. The only real gimmicky part to note is how he sustains his Poise. While his S1 is neutral, even accounting for turn end decay, his S2 is neg1 at turn end, and his S3 is neg2. His passive can give him a free count each turn while he's set up, but if you can't, somehow, get 2 Pride Resonance, his defense skills give him some pretty decent count, most notably his ult defense, which gives him a massive +4 count, up to 2 crit damage up, strictly better than damage up for him given it lets you to stack past 10 total, and assuming he's not double slotted, a slash power from the first passive. While I do enjoy the more complex IDs, generally, I'm not going to complain about a simple good ID, given how few we get. Not every single piece of content needs to have multiple status effects, 2 pages of descriptions, and gameplay that warrants an actual guide to it. It's nice to just have a more normal launch-like ID. The bleed just for MD is an insult to me personally though. Can we please get to Sinclair to have an actual bleed ID? He's got 4 separate IDs with it, and not one is even remotely usable in a pure bleed team. I'll use this to segue into talking about Harmony, because Singing Machine is pretty cool. For as text dense as this is, it ends up being a pretty simple, strong ego, although one with a few small caveats, most notably the clashing. While it does get a good chunk of clash power based on burn and bleed on the target, you'll need to be at or near that cap to even be on par with most He's. That said, however, the damage ends up being more than worth it. A 3-coin, 3-weight ego with a slight damage conditional based on missing health isn't great, but assuming you've got a decent bit of both SP and HP, that last coin can get reused up to 4 extra times, with each hit throwing out some rhythm. It's a small buff, but some offense level and bonus damage is always nice. Burn still has yet to get its season, but it does at least get a few IDs. U-Heath, while an ID I'm not fond of, is still worth mentioning as Heath's only burn ID, and it is better than U-Sync. That said, however, he's got some real issues in burn, and probably doesn't make it on most versions of the team, but hey, clearly some of you like the High Shao. He's got pretty good skills, with high coin counts, a great counter, and his High Shao buff letting you set up the stack even faster. His S3, while still unfocused, can do some real work once he's set up, although you'll likely need to do some work in most fights to keep the weight from backfiring. The real issue, however, is that setup. Gluttony is a scarce resource, and he needs 5 of it to ever actually pop his ult S3. Even once he's done that, he'll need another 3 turns in 90% of content to be fully battle-blooded. This is pretty infeasible unless you're making major concessions in team building, and while the payoff is legitimately good, Burn doesn't need a boost to the stack on turn 9. In dungeons, he's a far better option, especially if you let him get below 50%, but I'd suggest holding off on deploying him in normal stages. As for the other whack hybrid, Lamp Greg is just obviously not for Burn. I may not have been overly impressed by Fire Fist Greg, but in what world are you swapping him out for Lamp? That said, Lamp will be brought back up again for sinking. And then I bring up Myrrh again, who while not unusable in Burn, really doesn't justify himself over Thumb. Not only is he reliant on enemies dying to build up loyalty, a pretty important part of the kit, but he doesn't really do anything better than Thumb Myrrh. Spore is okay, but it's not like Burn is starving for count, and the only other benefits Spore provides are a slightly better burn burst, a singular bind, and some reward when the victims die. Look, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with this ID. It's not a bad design, the numbers are pretty good, and it's in an interesting design position, but it's a hybrid ID that only really works on one status and is in direct competition with the best ID of that status. If we get actual burn bleed support, a reason to care about Lobotomy Ego, or even just an Ego on par with Magic Bullet, I can see him doing stuff, but until then, just run Thumb and save yourself the resources. Moving on, sinking is still winning. While Reindeer Rodion did make me legitimately wonder about the sobriety of the PM design team, the rest of the funny blue IDs we've gotten since have all been, to at least some extent, good. Udget Autis will be first, and is unfortunately the only one I can't recommend running. To be entirely clear, she's good. If she was on any of the Sinkingless Sinners, or even someone like Ish, I'd be all for her. She's a fast, tanky, hard-hitting ID, and one that has effectively infinite ammo, the second best panic type in the game, and ways to boost Sinking's damage even further. Hell, she's easily Autis' best standalone ID, and was a pretty easy slot in for all the limited Sinner fights in C9, with how wonky actual status teams were for that. The problem? Sinking really can't just give up echoes, or at least not for an ID that doesn't apply something at least comparable. Blue Sand is good, great even, but 3 counter turn simply isn't anywhere in the ballpark of Echo's fairly consistent 5 to 8 count, and that's without the classic Echoes plus Ease Bygone to really get the stack going. Now, that said, you can still access Echoes without Udjat if you're willing to run Butler Faust, but I feel the downgrade there is too substantial to justify it, considering how Faust's new ID is pretty close to Autis's, but as always, choice is yours. The Faust ID in question, Index Faust, is one of my favourites, and thankfully, she's as good as she is fun. I'm going to discuss her and Don before E-Song for quite a few reasons, but it's worth noting that she doesn't get anything from E. She's good on her own. Her kit is fairly standard, although her S3 is notable for its way above the curve damage conditionals. The index as a whole is really good at hitting hard. As for the sources of that extra damage, it's all related and fairly simple to manage. Just follow the prescripts. For those who've not used her, here's how it works. Each turn, you're given one of 4 orders, depending on how much grace you have. 0 to 2 is use the marked skill, represented by this flower on the dashboard. 3 to 5 is hit with a marked skill, 6 to 8 is hit with a marked S3 or an ego, and 9s don't actually matter for literally anything. Then, when achieving any of the 3 relevant prescripts, you gain 1 grace at turn end. This likely seems awfully slow, especially considering the S3 or ego prescript, and you'd be right. There's an upside though. Each turn, if any IDs deployed are index IDs, a random enemy or part will be marked with the fittingly named prescript's target. On top of being an effective fragility for your index IDs, completing any prescript by hitting the target as the main target, not hit by weight, will instead provide enough grace to move you straight up to the next prescript. Usually this will be 3, but if you've already gotten a spare point or 2, it'll be a little less rewarding. Given how important getting this rapid grace is, you always want to focus on completing the prescript, even ignoring the penalty for failing it, which I'll get to. Wasting turns being weaker sucks, so each turn, make sure all your IDs at 8 or less grace actually build it. Use marked skills, or ego for the 3rd prescript, have the main target be the, well, target, and don't waste turns win rating for no reward. I'll briefly discuss the penalty for failing, and then that reward. Karmic Consequence is a fairly elegant punishment for ignoring prescript, especially given that sometimes you just can't actually achieve them. You'll get 5 whenever you go a turn without completing the prescript, with the exceptions of turns where you'd queued up an action to perform it, and for whatever reason weren't able to actually act, and any turn where you're entirely unactionable. Karmic's effects are really simple. For every 10 stacks, you get 1 defense level down, and for every 20, 1 fragile, to a cap of 100 total stacks. You'll likely notice that Faust doesn't suffer any downside for missing 1 prescript, and only really notices the issue at 20 karmic or 4 failures. While any amount of failures do make her counter shield gain get weaker, you'll be using it so rarely you'll legitimately never notice. As for the buff, Gracious gives her 1 offense level for each 3, capping at a total of 3. It's minor, but 1 clash power is always nice. Don is just the upgraded version, to the point of breaking into the top 4 sinking IDs while being strictly count negative. There's a lot of stuff here, but if you understood Index Faust, this will be pretty simple. The kit is, as you'd expect, entirely normal, although with that little index flare to bring it slightly above baseline. There's a lot of individual sinking infliction, making the synergy with Echoes even more heavily pronounced, but the real meat comes in her ego and unlock. This is a simple extra layer on the kit. For each 3 grace, she gets 1 unlock, and while she has unlock, she has ego. You can temporarily lose ego if you dip below 0 SP, but just getting back up to 25 SP restores it. In any case, this literally never comes up. Unlock is +1 defense level per stack, but the ego is more interesting. All of Don's skills get upgraded, especially the counter. She gets +1 speed, +1 poise potency from her skills, and +2 offense and defense level. You might have noticed that this means she can get a free +5 to both offense and defense levels by turn 3, just for using marked skills. This only gets better when she turns on Shin at unlock 3. She gets 2 more speed, bringing her to a 6-9 speed range. She gains +1 to Poise potency and count gain from her skills, another point of offense and defense level, and a bonus damage conditional based on her missing health, all on top of a kit that's just dripping with damage up conditionals. I need to elaborate on how absurd these buffs are. Dawn's upgraded S3 gets to have a +11 offense level difference, a universal +75% damage conditional, +120% extra bonus damage on the last coin, more damage based on her missing HP, and 5 separate instances of sinking for echoes. This isn't even a long setup. You'll be fully powered before turn 4, and Dawn even gets to do this without needing ego. Her counter, unlike Faust's, has a very important line of text, on top of being a 3-coin clashable that hits harder than her marked S1. While you do take a decent hit of karma for cheating on the prescript, it's absolutely worth doing if the other option is just gaining karma from failing anyway. Speaking of karma, Dawn will also get some when she actually pops ego. She'll gain a small amount the first time she goes into unlock 1 if her SP is less than 25. This barely matters, but if you really want her karma free, for whatever reason, a single turn 1 SP restoration effect will be enough. Her ego do actually matter, but they're both far less vital than Faust's. Her base ego doesn't cost you an arm and a leg, and Fluid Sac actually gets to show off how good it is. Seriously, this thing absolutely melts enemy SP bars. And now, the third in the ascending series of increasingly complex index IDs, and the 5th goddamn Esong sinking ID. Pick whatever name you want, Lord knows he's got a lot, and apparently for each name he's got they gave him a new line of text. That said, a lot of this is fluff, and the rest, it's my job to sort through. To put it simply, he's like Dawn in terms of consistency in his ramp up, except he gets a relevant punishment for having karma, and then a wind up for his S3 too, on top of not immediately getting his second unique buff, instead having to do a little work for it. As a baseline, kit is as you'd expect, although pay some attention to this line on each skill. It's mostly flavour, but does mean that you really want to avoid any amount of karma. Unlike Dawn, he's got no mandatory sources, so you'll only gain karma, and get nerfed, if you fail a prescript or cheat with the defense. As for the prescript, he's got a slightly different third one. Specifically, you need to get 9 Procuration Hermes, or in more sensible terms, hit with 9 red coins. He also gains 1 Hermes for each marked skill used, but this is pretty minor. There's not really a time limit on this one, you'll need to gain 1 a turn to succeed, and there's not any point in skipping it. He's got a pretty good evade, but a good evade doesn't really need much elaboration. You know when to use it. As for the passives, there's a lot, but most can be skimmed through. Just by being deployed, he gets indexed on a decent pair of damage boosts, because she needed more, and gains a small trade of defense level for offense level through his mask. Once he gets staggered, or uses a certain skill, mask is swapped out for sizzling wound. Somehow this is just an upgraded version of Mask, trading more defense level, reducing unopposed attack damage further, giving him plus 15% damage to base attack skills, and having the downside of, effectively, 2 damage a turn. Hermes is just a counter towards his big skill, as you'd expect, with the only thing of note being a cap to how quickly he gains it. You can only gain a max of 5 per turn, so no just looping the big S3, especially with it preventing you gaining Hermes the turn you use it. Finally, the last unique buff, Indulgence in Prescript, is the way to simulate Furioso Lacrimosa Crescendo by doubling the poison sinking application, giving each target hit plus 3 sinking count, gaining plus 30% damage, and just slapping 5 extra speed onto E for the fun of it. This one only lasts for the 1 turn and needs you to have sizzling, so it's not something you'll see in any fasting counter. You can just leave Furioso on the dashboard to get 5 speed a turn? Sure. As for Furioso, here it is. Probably the single best skill in the game at present. By base, this is a 30 roll across 9 coins, all of which are unbreakable, that's randomly unaffected by paralyze, and inflicts 3 fragile for some reason. It's got damage conditionals when it's marked, which it'll always be, S3s are prioritised, from Shin Fate, from the majority of the random weapons, don't worry too much about them, it's a lot of text that means very little, and from his passive giving it another plus 20%, all without even going into this line here. It's not really relevant, but it is very funny. If you lose any clashes, you don't lose any coin power. Sure, even at its best, the skill is neg 3 count, but is reasonably likely to go neutral from echoes, assuming you have Indulgence for plus 3 count, and much more importantly, most enemies just die when you hit them with a 9 coin skill. This all should sound pretty good, which it is, but there is the obvious question. Does it make up for not running Solemn? There's several upsides, several downsides, but it probably comes down to the boring answer of both IDs are on par. Index E is far less team reliant, doesn't drain his own SP, provides gluttony, deals much more damage, and has a better S3 that he also has more access to. Solemn, however, provides SP and damage to teammates, has actual count infliction, and doesn't interrupt his own cycle to use Ego. Obviously for MD, the ID with more keywords is better, but I'm generally a fan of Index even outside of that. He's not perfect, but just not needing micromanagement to keep his SP stable is a big improvement, although for unfocused encounters he can be rough to get set up. Finally leaving the Index section, Lampcrack has honestly surprised me. From the preview we got, I expected something pretty dire, but the whole kit has just worked well. I assumed the redirect it regardless of speed would have some sort of conditional lock like Zvyish, but he just always gets to keep his core gimmick working, all on a pretty above curve kit. He's got really easy coin power conditions, pretty high count infliction on the S2 and S3, Dazzle's a really strong panic changer, and a pretty simple plus coin boost on the S3 to make his Soul Lament easier to access. He's way better than Link and Greg. While he loses out on the absurd S2, every other part of the kit is better. Lamp is a pretty minor buff, being just a stacking bind for Greg's conditions, but it's also how you get Dazzle. Just let it passively stack up, it'll cap eventually. As for his other unique buff, Guardians of the Forest is just a slight way to speed up your number 1 ID's SP ramp up. 4 SP isn't much, but 2 offense level up is much better. As such, I suggest having Index Dawn as your first deployed center if you run Lamp Greg, given he'll save her some karma early, and give her more offense level once she's wound up. And then we get the second Wallop ID, and a decent segue into the growing pile of Tremor sinking IDs. Much like Lamp Greg, I'd not expected much from her, at least on sinking, given her singular sinking count infliction on each skill, combined with her high coin count. Thankfully, she gets Walt privilege, and more so than murdered. All her base skills are count neutral, and while her bonus skills both lack that absurd count infliction, the S1-2 applies 2 count next turn for the next 2 turns, so it really is just the S3-2 that loses count. As for how the ID itself plays, it's a fairly simple and strong ammo ID. Its general goal is to try and get a target to neg 40 SP as early as possible, then spend ammo to just continuously use free S1s, S12s, and even the real big S32. There are some oddities to the kit, most notably that while you do want to dump ammo to get your reload and mag dump skill, the best way to spend ammo is the S1. Without dual slotting, you can only get the S12 out every other turn, given the S2 only spends 1 bullet, and the S3 spends nada. She's also incredibly reliant on the target actually having SP, given that if you can't reduce the target to neg 40, she loses access to the majority of her damage output. This puts her in a weird spot, as sinking already has lots of options. I'll likely to do some testing to see if she helps make a trio of sinking Tremor worth running over Butler Altis, but that seems unlikely given her partner in crime really likes Echoes. As for her use in Tremor, it's a little odd in that she's got quite a bit of Tremor infliction, but her only real access to bursts come from her S1-2, which not only does she have incredibly limited access to on a team that doesn't instantly tank the opponent's SP, but is also unfocused and needs 2 or more coins to hit the same target if you want any bursts. It's not unusable and easily the best Tremor Rio, helped by her not replacing good Tremor types away, but not as auto-include as you'd expect. Thankfully for me, Rupture's gotten nothing since its season, so I get to avoid talking about that mistake for a little bit longer. Now, there'll be the updated versions of each of the changed statuses in the description. As for the next video, Bleed is getting a full new one very soon, there'll be a middle one once Outages gets released, and an odd one I'm hoping you'll enjoy at some point, so we'll see how that goes. So, with that out of the way, I'll see you next time.